Cool. Plan weekly meeting, 25th of May, 2022. Martin, you have the first point.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I put together a list of issues you might like to be aware of that Sasha will be working at as part of beautifying our UI for 15.1. This is the second iteration of the thing, and it has one product designer per app with an engineer to deliver stuff fast without researching. And I think its handbook paragraph says that the merge requests description is the main, I don't know, like source of truth for it. I don't know, like help me if you remember the phrasing. As in, it doesn't have to have like big planning and research. And yeah, so 15.1.0 caught a couple tech writers unawares because delivering docs wasn't part of the process. So you might have noticed like some things moving in the merge request UI. And this time, whenever our stuff is going to be touched, I made sure to say, hey, please update the docs as well. And so yeah, Nick, you had a comment on issue headers.
Oh yeah, just noting that I think was sort of an example of where that process stopped short, just because I think in the last round they had updated the merge request headers as part of this, and then we thought, oh, we can just do this with issues and epics, and then pretty quickly kind of realized that the structure of those pages is not quite similar enough for that to be an easy change. So like that started in that process, but has kind of got pulled out of that for more deep discussion and planning. But the other ones I think are moving along.
Cool. And like I said, I'm bringing it up here because I noticed that they're all labeled with group compliance, which is Sasha's group. And so they won't appear on plan issue boards. And I'm never sure because, how to use these stage group labels because, like I don't have my own group. So I always apply the ones, that are related to the subject area of the change being made. But sometimes, and I guess like plan engineers do it as well, people apply the group that they belong to. So you can track it. It's not really a question, but if anyone want to comment.
Yeah, just real quick. I don't know if we have it in our handbook as the process around when to apply a group label or stage labels. But what we have been doing within plan is groups are the engineers that are developing it, and then the stage label is the stage that the feature is in. So for these, it would be DevOps plan, but then group compliance. So I don't know if that's an official way, but that's kind of the way we've been doing it. Also, thanks, Martin. I appreciate you listing these out because in the last milestone, there were a few cases where I think we were kind of surprised around changes to some of the UX on the plan pages. So it's nice to kind of see what is coming up listed out here.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and John, just to kind of vocalize your question about UX in front end being involved. I know the last time, I think I started like just after the last round kicked off, and it was a little surprising to see some of those changes come through. And so this round, I've been involved in some of these as on the UX side, but I think some of the feedback from the first time was that there's probably a bit more of a need to involve or at least make aware the impacted UX teams. I'm not sure on the front end side what who's getting pulled in or if there's awareness there. I can bring that back to the UX team if that's an issue.
There has been a recent change in UX. I'm looking for the link. That because now UX designers are required to review user-facing changes, but also via roulette. Not necessarily the person assigned to the group or to the feature is going to review it. So the change is in the UX process for the designer that reviews the thing to also ping the DRI for that area when they're done, just as an FYI. So I hope it helps. I'm gonna add the link when I find it.
Are we collecting feedback on the changes as well? Like every individual change?
There is a retro for 15.0, and people are discussing specific issues. I guess yes, in the individual issues. I don't know, but the retro is a good place for that. I can also link the 0.0 retro when I find it.
Thanks. I think it's cool that we're trying to like reintroduce some agility and that kind of thing. I just like, for example, there was a change made to I don't know if you noticed, like the I don't know what you call it, like just underneath the title of MRs, where it used to say the author of the MR's name and their username, and now it says someone requested to merge a branch into another branch. Mm-hmm. And nowhere on the MR anymore does it say that person's username. So
yeah,
if you want
neither
to, like,
in the sidebar.
Yeah. So I mean, like, it's probably all in the round a good change if the username was brought back in, right? Like I said, I like the agility that it brings. I'm just a bit wary that our like domain expert UX aren't involved.
Yeah, that same exact change you're talking about is one where it was like, it's coming up now in this like other headers sort of refresh, but I feel like had we taken a slightly different approach where we looked at like how can we create a header that supports all of these types from the start, the approach might have been a little bit different, as opposed, and instead we created one for merge requests and then tried to apply it to issues and then realized, oh, the issue editing experience is not the same as the MR, and it like doesn't quite make sense. So it's cool that it got updated, but there's a little bit of like, how do we maybe make this gel a little bit more? But this is the second round, so I think some changes are already happening.
Yeah, so we can move to your beep, John, and I will add what you asked about feedback and we'll link to the retro issue.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, B is mostly resolved, I think, on Slack, but feel free to weigh in if you disagree with me. So on the product planning side of the team, we're looking to introduce parent hierarchies. Basically, issues can have tasks as children or as child items. And so far, we've built the empty state of the widget on the front end into the new work item view, but I think I misunderstood or Florian misunderstood that where it should go. So I think this possibly also is because of like project management is kind of also working on work items. So I think I resolved this on Slack that it should in fact be in the old issue view, and I guess we'll move it at some point in the future to the work item view. If you disagree, please voice that. Alexandria, see you indented your item as well here. Otherwise, like, you can check out the work item view in the meantime to see what this widget's going to look like, and already it looks pretty good considering it's just an empty state. So don't know if it'll be revised later by the beautifying our UI thing, but it looks pretty good to me anyway. Nick, you had something to say about this?
Oh, it was more just a question because this is not super familiar to me, so I was just curious where I could find some of the background on it.
Yeah, I'll find the designs and paste them in. There's sort of extensive designs on this actually.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, I thought that this parent widget is somewhat new, and like we don't have hierarchies within the issues, and that kind of appears only within the work items model or logical model. So to me, it sounded that we will add that to the work items, and I think we had a discussion last time that would love to keep work items as separate as possible from issues so that like when you add anything remove to the development, it don't really affect user experience with the current issues. So this is, and I might not be following all the latest discussions because of the headcount reset, so correct me if I'm wrong, but like to me, this is slightly news, although I try to follow things. So yeah, I don't know if something like having the parent or the hierarchy widget within the issues page itself. Because I'm not
Alexandra, where's that discussion we have? I could have swore we had that discussion somewhere also, but I can't find it, saying that for the most part, we are building widgets for work items as opposed to building widgets that are going to be available in the legacy views. But if I do recall, there was also, we added a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of flexibility in that if something is, like if we really need it to be part of an issue, they should be flexible enough where we are able to use it in an issue, but there has to be a really good argument to add that to issues because it's going to take a decent amount of effort to get widgets into issues, and we'd rather spend that time working on getting them into work items or progressing work items.
Yeah, I think the discussion was more generic in the sense that let's not combine things together, and from there, like the widgets went into the work items. And I think it was during some of our meeting, so it was not a sync, but during a meeting, I think. Yeah, so the idea was to like try and separate, because I don't see an easy way to introduce this kind of new things into the old UIs or old APIs and so on and so forth. I'd say at least from my perspective, that we added to the work items APIs, UIs, and so on. If we really need to add it to the old UIs and APIs for any reason, we can think how we can do that. But otherwise, it feels like I'm afraid we'll get into this situation where like everything is intermixed up so badly that it'll be hard to maintain. And I'll let other engineers also speak up to that, but yeah. And again, I'm not sure I've seen where we specifically say that we want the parent widget to be on the issue details page or whatnot.
Yeah, I think the plan to gradually move items over into, or to start with adding widgets to work items is good in most cases. But I think if we need to build something new on issues, like we'll be waiting so long for parity between the work items view and the issues view because it has so many widgets that we won't be able to release that feature for a long time. while we wait for that parity to happen. Whereas in the case of like requirements only really have like title description and like state or whatever. So like it's much easier to go from a task which just has like, I guess, a title to like title description and that, and then when we need something for something else, add it and gradually fill everything in.
On backend side, it would be quite tricky to add widgets to issues too. At least until now, I thought that we are about to implement widgets for work items endpoint only. If this should change, it would be good to clarify this now, because otherwise it means implementing widgets on 2 different places for backend, and I don't see too much reason for this, because if it would be just a matter of making a widget available in some UI, it would be great if frontend could just request this data from the new endpoint if possible.
Yeah, so would we be able, is the plan to be able to query a widget outside of querying the work item? Does that make sense? Like, are we going to have, in order to get the widget data from within a work item, are we going to make a single query for like get like or just work item, or is it going to be widget with a ID for the widget and then getting data at that level?
So it's going to get widget data for a work item. You would query the work item API endpoint. I mean, there is no some widget generic endpoint.
Yeah, if you take, for instance, description, you cannot really say, give me description with ID 5 or whatnot. You really want the work item and then pull the description widget related to that work item. Does that answer your question, Donald? Like, you really need to query the like to get the work item and then get at least a part of the widgets, right? Like description weight is really linked directly to that specific work item. Some widgets may be queried separately, but those are more like associations. But then again, even so, you'll need to get the work item or the issue, get those, like, let's say we're talking about assignees, right? Those do have their own, like they can be considered their own things, but you'd still need to know which ones do you want to fetch. Like, you'll need to find the IDs first and then directly fetch those widgets, if you will. But yeah, I don't know if that makes kind of sense to query the widget itself directly. Although, yeah, I don't.
Because on the mutation side, we're going to want to update just a widget, and I guess even at that point, we'll have the work item reference more than likely. But would it be possible to go the other way where we have an ID for every widget? So we do have the ability to just query at the widget level or make a mutation at the widget level without having a work item reference?
Well, so for mutations, we are discussing whether it makes sense to have one big mutation for the work item and you pass widget data and call the create or update mutation for the work item, or you have a separate widget specific mutation. I think this is what you mean, right?
Well, yeah. So if we have the widget specific mutation, we're going to need either a widget ID, right?
Well, so it depends on case by case, but for widgets where there would be a separate mutation, I would expect that you still send both work item ID, which on which you want to update the widget data, and you send widget data object together with it. So basically, both when listing widgets or when there would be mutation, there is no strictly a widget ID, but there is rather some unique widget type name. It can be either description for the new description widget or hierarchy for the widget type. And together with the work item ID, it defines exactly for what resource and what widget it should be assigned to, or by what widget it should be processed.
Okay. Gabe's not here. Oh, Gabe is here. Okay, Gabe, question for you then. Do we ever plan on having the having multiple widgets of the same widget type on a work item page? Because if we go with using like the name as the way to identify what to get or what query or what mutation to get on the widget level, it may be hard if we have like duplicate widgets within a single work item type.
The only time I could see having duplicates was when we get to doing custom fields or something like that, because custom fields are going to have like a data type, like it could be a string or an integer or something like that. And you might have multiple widgets that are of type string, right? But I don't ever see there being multiple of the same widgets, like 2 milestone widgets or whatever. I don't think that is what happened. There was a thread somewhere in maybe the original work item discussion issue where we talked about this, where there would be duplicates when we get to custom fields, but not for anything else.
Maybe iterations is something to consider if you have an issue within multiple different iterations. That can be something in future. I'm just saying.
Well, there would be a future where maybe you can have an issue assigned to multiple milestones, but we would represent those all. The multiple milestones will all be in the same widget, the same milestone widget, right? We wouldn't have.
That's one way. The other way is like to have multiple widgets, right?
Yeah.
Or discussions, like if we decide to have like a issue thread as a widget, as opposed to the entire discussion section as a widget.
Yeah, that could be another use case.
Yeah. I should also point out that now, at least at this point, mapping of what widgets are available to what issue type or what work item is hard-coded, and we don't keep this in database. So in future, when we allow some custom widgets, we will probably have to make this dynamic or stored in database, and at that point it will make sense to have ID for each widget for each work item. So then it will be possible to reference each specific widget for each work item as Donald asked originally, but that's not possible now, or it's not used. We don't have unique IDs for widgets. No.
I would expect by the time we get to the point where we have like, say 2 descriptions for a work item that we will have an ID for those descriptions because we'll need to store them separately in the database, or milestones or iterations,
Yes,
whatever.
exactly. Yes. But at this point, yeah, you are right. But now, basically, it's possible to have only a single one widget of the given type for one work item. Yeah, so we just define requirements can have description and these widgets, or issue can have description and a hierarchy widget, but we don't, but that's all. Yeah.
Cool. Can I paraphrase Gabe's point? Because I originally wanted to circle back to your original question, Jan, as well, which was like we'd ideally have them on both views, right? So start with the issue view and then move the component to the new work item view. And like ideally, like we'd split our thinking about that. And on the back end, it would be a single API, right? The work items API, we don't want to produce widgets for the issues API. We just want the component to use the work items API, whether it's on the issues view or on the work items view. So this is maybe a question for Donald and Kushal or any other front-end engineers on the call. Is that going to be possible? I know it's probably an extra call while it's on the issue view, right? Because we're only loading the issue at that point. But I think it would be an extra call anyway, even if we somehow did build widgets into the issues API.
We did have a fair amount of discussion on whether we want to fire a single query when an item is loaded with multiple widgets. Basically, whether we want to have multiple queries run for each widget within the work item, or we want to have a single query combining the entire data. I think there were mixed opinions there, and we didn't have any consensus on how to go about it. Here are the scenarios. Like if work item ends up replacing issues in the future, 1 or 2 years down the line, then it is going to have a ton of widgets within the single page. And if we are going to make queries for each widget in the issue, then we are looking at 10, 20 queries running simultaneously. That may be a problem depending on whether one of the query fails and we have to refetch that query to make sure that the data shows up. Alternatively, if we fire a single query for all the widgets combined, then that ends up creating the payload size much larger than what we would want, especially for people who are on slower networks. And if that giant query response fails to arrive, then user is staring at a failing page. So that was basically the discussion that we had, like how to balance this situation, whether we want to combine and make a single query when the number of widgets are less, and whether we want to make individual queries when number of widgets are too many.
Yeah, so I think we can, like even if we make smaller queries, I think that's fine because everything will be batched and it'll only, like we're having the issue, John, that you pointed out with participants, where that query is taking a long time, but it's causing all of the other, like on the sidebar, there's a separate query for essentially every component there. But the loading of all of those components are, it's the slowest query is what's causing them all to kind of load slowly. So, I mean, I would prefer smaller queries because then we have the flexibility to, like with the participants example, if we wanted to, we can pull that query out because we know it's the least performant one on pages that have a lot of participants. So there's just a bit more flexibility there, where if we just had everything in like a single work item query, I guess technically we could still pull it out and run 2 queries of the same query, just different, requesting different fields, just a bit tougher to do that.
not to mention, but some of the widgets may require observers instead of queries, and that's when it might be useful to not combine all the items or all the requests into a single giant request, especially things like labels, assignees. We would want those to be observables instead of queries.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, it's a lot easier to add subscription to make it real time when it's a standalone query. That's why ideally for like planning hierarchy, we're just making like I think we can still query at the work item level. But if we were able to just have like widget with a widget ID and then get the data, it might be a little easier on the front end. But if we can't do that, we can't do that.
Just a quick question. So to Jan's point, like in the short term, there's nothing like in the framework, like no opinion in the Vue framework or anything that's stopping us from loading the old issue page, and for this widget, requesting the work items API to provide a list of children, right? I mean, we can use that work items API on this view and use it in future on the work item view.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, because we'll have the work item ID. So yes, it'll just be, so that'll be two separate calls, but we're already making two separate calls. Like some things are rendered in GraphQL, some things are rendered in through like our Vuex side of things. So yeah, no, there's nothing stopping us from adding another query to the issue page for the work item data.
Awesome. Sorry, Jan, I skipped your question.
No problem at all. So just one concern about multiple requests versus one big one. So I expect that many widgets, it will be very cheap to actually load its data, and I would highly recommend to actually load this data as the original, as part of the original request. So if you load description or weight or other simple attributes on the object, it's much cheaper to load this as part of the single query, and then just do separate requests for widget data which are expensive, which might be, for example, getting weights of all the child weights of issues or something like this, which takes a lot of time. And the GraphQL API is actually designed in the way it's supported. If you look at this schema, just a second, I will paste to the doc. So there is a schema in the issue description of the in the merge description, and you can just run a request and pick a specific widget data you need. Yeah, so other widget data will be ignored. So you can easily combine a big query together with a couple of small queries. Yeah, and I would recommend not to strictly run a separate request for each separate widget.
Yeah, and I think that answered my question here. So the significant overhead is to run multiple requests, not multiple queries. So as long as we're running multiple queries within a single request, we're okay.
Yeah, you mean multiple queries So yeah, you mean some multiplexing the GraphQL request, right?
Yeah, so Apollo on the front end automatically batches all the queries that are run at a single time. So like on the sidebar of the issue page, every component there is a separate query, but it's just a single request to GraphQL. Is that okay?
Yeah, so it's probably a little bit better, but still not. I mean, there will still be additional overhead compared to if you request data for cheap widgets in one query. Yeah, because both queries will be processed separately. But I don't know how big overhead or additional time there is, so I can answer now how big penalty there is. But I don't know if there is a reason for not requesting multiple widget data, at least the cheap one, as part of one query, if it's somehow more difficult for front end. But API is designed or prepared to provide multiple widget data if possible.
I think we are already doing similar approach in places like issue boards where we load only initial metadata which is required to render the page using a lightweight version of the REST API. And then once the page is loaded, we get the additional data that is going to take longer if we were to do it in the same request itself. I think it is similar to like downloading email headers, and then when the email is opened, then you download the email body. So I think that approach should be possible. I don't see at least any technical challenge in doing so with regards to work items. So yeah, should be possible.
Awesome.
With 10 minutes left, we should squeeze in a demo here from Kushal.
Yeah, I'll try to make it quick. Okay. So so Gabe basically found an issue with the Epic's bulk editing, and this was pointed out by one of our customers. So the problem that was happening with regards to Epic's list bulk editing was that whenever you click on edit Epics and then select bunch of Epics and then try to add or remove labels, it would end up removing or adding unwanted labels to the Epics. And it turned out that the approach that we were using was incorrect, obviously. And so then I looked at how it does in case of issues. And even in issues case, bulk editing is confusing there. So I'm just going to demo the fix that we have made. And I just wanted wider visibility from the team, just to know your thoughts, like whether this approach looks reasonable, whether it is acceptable, and whether we can go ahead and merge it and then maybe update it for other listing items as well. So here's what is happening right now. So for example, if I select these epics, notice that the first one has only one label, this one has two labels. Now, when I open the labels dropdown, it basically fetches the labels list and marks the label which is common for the selection as checked. It isn't showing this particular label as checked because it is not present in this particular epic. So now the dropdown will only show labels highlighted as marked when those labels are applied for all the selected epics. So for example, if I want to remove, if I want to add this label to this epic as well, I just need to mark it, then close the dropdown and then do the update tool. It will basically reload the page and now all the labels are added. If I want to remove, say, this label from both the epics, then I would just select it. And now when the labels dropdown is opened, it shows the common labels across the selection as marked within the dropdown. So if I just unselect this and do the update tool, it will remove that label. In case I select the epics which have no labels in common, then when I open the dropdown, it will not show any label as checked, because these three epics have distinct set of labels applied. So in this case, if I want to add a label, I can do so by selecting a label that is not present in one of the epics. So for example, this particular label is present in the third item, but not the first and second one. So if I just select check on it and then do the update all, it will essentially apply that label to the entire list. If an item has no labels present, obviously it will not show anything in the dropdown. And if I select one of the items which has the labels and again open the dropdown, it is not going to show the labels as present. So the key difference here when it comes to issues list bulk editing is that it highlights the label in this middle state where the label would not have a checkbox, it will instead have a hyphen. So the way it works, I'm not sure whether we are communicating this behavior in the documentation, but the hyphen here means that do not touch this label, leave this label as it is for the issues that are selected in the list. So if you want to add a label, you can just select that label and then click on update all and it will update the selection. But since the hyphen is this middle state and from the UX perspective, it is confusing, at least in my opinion, and even Alexis agrees to it. So we ended up at least changing the behavior for epics list and see how the users take it in. But then again, if any of you feel that the approach that we are using in issues list or merge request list is a valid UX, then feel free to leave your thoughts in the merge request that is open. I have not assigned it to any maintainer for review or merge because I want to at least have a consensus from rest of the team before we proceed. So yeah, that is all I had for the demo.
Thanks, Kushal. So what you showed first was your work, yeah, and not the current state.
Yes.
So I like from the UX perspective, I would prefer if we showed the intersection, like what currently is shown by the hyphen. I do agree with you and Alexis that the hyphen is awkward because it looks like a minus. So it, in some other products like Gmail, for example, it's in a box. So you can see it's kind of an indeterminate checkbox. So have you thought about perhaps showing it, but using a different symbol or?
Yeah, so the thing is that the labels dropdown that we have currently available in GitLab. So there are 3 variations of labels dropdown. One of the labels dropdown supports this hyphen state. Not all the labels dropdown support it yet. And right now, be it issues or merge request lists, there is no way on UI to communicate what hyphen means. Like there is no tooltip or a popover which shows on hover like what it means. So if we were to show indeterminate state for the items which are part of the dropdown, then I think that's an enhancement that we need to work on and replace the hyphen with the box like you mentioned. Right now, as far as the epics list is concerned, we are fixing a bug because currently it was reported by customer that they are seeing unnecessary labels showing up in their items when they just updated only one label. So this is more of a fix, but then again, this approach may end up replicating in other parts of the application. The issues list that I demoed just now is an older issues list. We have a feature flag in our code base, which has basically a view implementation of issues list. And within that view implementation, the hyphen is still there, but the behavior is still different from what the HAML list is. So, yeah.
I'll raise just one point. I'm wondering, I understand that it fixes an UX. I'm just wondering if we should lean towards consistency first and then implementing the UX fix or not. So it's just like raising a point. It's not a request or anything. Just my point of view. I think it may become confusing. And again, people will, like customers will start saying, well, why is it behaving one way and the other way in the other place, and it's confusing and so on. So yeah, it might be something to think about.
Yep, thanks. So I'll update the MR and see if we can get the hyphen show up again, at least so that we have some consistency across the lists. And then we can work on replacing that hyphen with a box with a proper tooltip representing what it means in a different issue and a different merge request. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Also, I just noticed playing around with my inbox that actually, like, they show the minus in a box, not on individual messages, but on the button that would normally check or uncheck all. That shows that it contains a mixed state, but it never appears on individual items. So that's why it's awkward, probably.
Alex, we have 2 minutes for your workflow item.
Yeah, so I've realized fairly soon that I have an MR with removing some of the deprecated arguments on the GraphQL endpoint. And on my one-on-one with Donald here, he also said that we had something that should have made it to the 15.0 deprecation removals or something. So I was discussing with him, and I'm wondering if we can improve the process on how we can track that stuff easier. It's difficult because we only do removals on major releases, but we don't really have the milestones, so to say, created in advance, up and like a year in advance. So like we cannot have an issue or something that will get pinpoint to the specific milestone so that we would know in advance. So I was wondering if we can maybe have some sort of an epic that will live on our stage page or somewhere that doesn't change, and something that we kind of regularly check for release posts or for other stuff, and it will not get lost as easily as it seems to happen.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's something because I think product is responsible for creating milestones ahead, right? Or product leadership does those. Like, I wonder if we can just go ahead and create at least the upcoming major milestones. So even if we just create a 16.0 milestone, and then we can, for that stuff, we can kind of put into the 16.0 milestone. Do you know, Gabe? That's like if there's a reason we don't create more milestones ahead of where we're at.
I don't know why. We could ask product operations in that channel. They might know. I think they're the ones that do it.
Yeah, we can create at least placeholder milestones for major releases or something, for next major release, so things like that.
I think one of the reasons why we maybe don't do it that far in advance, because that one time we had the .11 release, which then we had to go in and update like 12 other milestones and change their dates forward. That was annoying. It's the only thing I can think of. I don't know why we wouldn't, but if you're curious, I would just ask in the product operations channel. Ryan, Ray, and Farnish are the DRIs for that. So
yeah, it may be hard to change it for the company level, so maybe it's something that we can do for our own stage, like that. We can take the decision easier, right? The way we want to track it, so that we don't skip this stuff. Anyway.
Yeah, just want to mention, like, as well, I copied in the deprecation process for GraphQL. Off the top of my head, I think you have to remove in a major release, deprecate at least 6 months in advance. So anything that's not deprecated by 15.6 can't be removed until 17.0. And who knows what will be happening in 17.0 in the world. So yeah, I think it'd be interesting to go through our APIs and kind of see what we can remove. Like Kushal mentioned that we used to call due date on epics end date, and we still support both in the API. Like we could definitely remove that on internal notes. Everything is still called confidential when it should be called internal, and just having a bit more consistency would be good. So like bearing in mind, we're already in 15.1. we would need to enumerate and deprecate all of these things. Like deprecation's not hard, you just put some documentation in. But if we want to remove them in 16.0, like it needs to be done within 4 milestones, basically.
Yeah, I think the problem is also, and I might be wrong there, but I think that's how we document it, is if you deprecated it in advance, but you failed to remove it in one major release, you kind of have to wait yet another year or whatnot to remove it, because we only allow removals, even if it's deprecated for a long time, we only allow removals in like major releases. You cannot remove it in a minor release. So that's where this point comes from, because the amount that I had is definitely like more than half a year long, and it has been in deprecations, but I just failed to remember to add it to the note, because I think we notify a couple milestones even before the major release or something like that. Yeah, it's a very complicated process, to say the least.
I think for GraphQL, yeah, like by 0.6 release.
Cool. I don't have capacity at the minute to be the DRI for this investigation into endpoints that could be removed, but maybe in a couple of weeks, unless somebody else wants to take it in the meantime. I think we just create an issue and start stuffing the description with things that we find in the API.
The issue gets lost as well. If you put it in the backlog, then goodbye issue. But yeah, I don't know, I can probably create an issue. Should I create it in our plan stage group about like discussing what we want to do about this, or there is no need for more discussion? I'd rather go to the product operations, whatnot, and bug them about that.
Yeah, I mean, like anything really, like if we have an issue that we can start talking about it in, honestly, I would just go through and say, like, how can we improve generally, not even just remove stuff from the API, but in the case of like internal notes, could we keep it where, like, you know, it's called confidential in the API? Like, yeah, probably, but like it's a constant just extra cognitive load that we don't really need. So, you know, in that case, like, yes, we're deprecating something, but we also have extra work to add a new field for internal things like that. So I just make the whole issue about like, how can we improve the APIs generally from that point of view? Like, but definitely like anything that we want to remove in 16.0, like we need to deprecate by 15.6.
Okay.
I think that's us. Martin's items read only, and we're over time. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming. See you next week, hopefully.
Thanks. Bye.